A lot has been made about the new UEFA formats for their European competitions, the Champions League, the Europa League, and the Conference League. With Europa League play now being underway, the discussion has turned to the fact that the teams knocked out of the Champions League no longer drop down to the Europa League. But I'm not sure if this is a good or bad thing, and I think the answer really depends on who you root for. So we're going to talk about the implications of this next, here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. So you don't exactly need to be a football historian to remember the days of dropping out of the Champions League and going down to the Europa League. It was just last year. If you didn't advance beyond a certain point in the Champions League, you went down to the lower competition. And there were pros and cons to that, and a lot of the pros and cons depend on who you rooted for. If you root for a team that did not play up to their standard in the Champions League, you had a consolation prize, and that felt nice, but was it fair? And was it fair to the clubs that were in the Europa League competing for a European title? At the same time, is it fair now that those opportunities don't present themselves to clubs who get knocked out early and maybe shouldn't be in the Champions League competition in the first place? So there's a lot of opinions here to weigh, and we're going to break down all of them and maybe some of the unintended consequences here and provide you with a couple of options that could solve this problem. We're going to get to all that in a minute, but before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in the comment section. Do you like this part of the change? Do you not like it? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. You can also leave comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub and check out our website, pitchsidepub.com. So the new format for for all the UEFA tournaments has been analyzed to death, and I will continue to maintain that anybody who's telling you it's confusing is lazy and not doing their homework, and they're just afraid of new things. So don't buy into it. It's very simple. 4 pots, 36 teams, everybody plays 8 games. The top 8 get a bye, the next 16 play each other, the bottom 8 are gone. And that last part is the key. That bottom 8 is not going to the Europa League. They are done. They are out of European competition for the remainder of the season. And there are parts about that are fair, and there are parts that are not. If you are in the Europa League, you can argue that it's not fair to then get this influx of new competition into your tournament, and not just new competition, but theoretically better competition, right? These are clubs that made the Champions League, and they are coming down to your second-tier tournament, and theoretically should be some of the immediate favorites. And we have seen winners in the past who started in the Champions League and took that path, although it's not always the case. And this has been brought up a lot, and especially with some of the big clubs in the Premier League who are playing in the Europa League. Tottenham is a great example. I've heard a lot of sort of talk about Tottenham and how they really have a good chance to win the Europa League. And part of the reason is because there is no drop down for those Champions League clubs who don't, get out of the group stage or make a deep run. And that's true. Tottenham should be one of the favorites for the Europa League. They've got a bigger budget and spent more in the transfer market than, half of the Europa League combined. And so they should be favorites. But is just making a club like Tottenham favorite in that tournament really the reason to do this format? And again, it has pros and cons because not every team is the same, right? Not every Champions League team is the same. Not every Europa League team is the same. And you have such a wide disparity in these competitions. And that sort of, creates the problem, right? It would not be fair. It would not really be no one's benefiting from Manchester City or Real Madrid or Barcelona or Bayern Munich. If they do manage to get knocked out in the early stages of the Champions League, why should they get a second shot? They haven't really earned that. They don't need that. If they lose, they lose, right? Because their favorites are among the favorites to win the Champions League, to win the big tournament, right? Liverpool, Inter, Dortmund, like all the pot 1 teams, right? But what about, Slavia Praha or Slovan Bratislava or Young Boys or Sturm Graz? Like, these clubs now have no backup option, and that seems very unfair to them. They have almost no shot of doing well in the Champions League. They are massive, massive underdogs. And so to have a consolation prize, a tournament like the Europa League, where they probably ought to be anyway, makes a lot of sense. And they are now being deprived of that opportunity, and that seems unfair. If you just took the 36 top teams and put them in the Champions League, Tottenham would be in there above Young Boys, right? Because they are, I'm sure, a better team. If they played 10 times, Tottenham would probably win, 7, 8 of them. But they weren't champions of their league. Young Boys got in because they won a a domestic league, right? That's what gets them in. It's a lesser league, but they made it in for that reason. So they've earned their spot, but now they're just going to get curb stomped for 8 games and be done. And is that really, what does that get them? It gets them money, but it certainly isn't going to allow them a chance to win anything. And that's sort of the problem here. Whenever I'm evaluating competition formats, I'm always looking at the opportunity a club has to actually compete and win. And yes, Sturm Graz and Young Boys have every chance as everybody else, but do they really? No, not really. So it would be nice if those clubs had the fallback option. However, we don't want to create it for everybody, right? Man City doesn't deserve that. If they flame out in the group stage, they deserve to be done. Same thing with Real Madrid. When you're adding the kind of talent that they're adding and spending the kind of money that those clubs are adding, sorry, you don't get the fallback option. Save that for the clubs who are the underdogs here. So how do we go about doing this? That's sort of the question here. And I've come up with 2 solutions that might work, and they're very different. You couldn't do both of them. You'd have to pick either or, and I'd love for you to get down in the comment section and let me know which one you like, or if you've got something else completely different that you'd like to see done. Get in that comment section, let me know what you think, but you can vote for option 1 or 2. I would love some feedback on this and if it makes sense. You can do this one of 2 ways. Either you only make the drop down eligible for, let's say, pot 3 and 4 teams. You could even make it just pot 4, but I would suggest pot 3 and 4. And so the pot 1 and 2 teams that finished first and second in most of their respective leagues, if you guys lose in the group stage, you're out. Sorry, you're out. But the pot 3 and 4, theoretically the bottom half of the competition, does have the opportunity, if you don't make it out of the group stage, maybe that bottom 8, they can go on to the Europa League, right? Or something along those lines. You go by pot. You go by the ranking of the UEFA coefficient, which is how they did the pots in the first place. So if you are in the bottom half of that UEFA coefficient of that 36 teams in the Champions League, you get a fallback option. That's option number 1. Option number 2, and I personally think I like this one better, you only have the option, no, it's an option, you only have the fallback. You only drop down to the Europa League if you flame out of the Champions League in the group stage, if you are from one of the smaller countries, right? One of the lesser leagues. So again, we have the UEFA coefficient. We go by club. We have that coefficient. We also have the one by league for league difficulty. That's how they rank how many Champions League spots and how many Europa League spots these leagues get throughout Europe. So obviously not England, Spain, Italy, Germany, and France is generally considered the big 5, although in the coefficients lately they have been behind Portugal and Belgium, and it fluctuates from year to year. I'd be okay going big 5. I'd be okay going 7 or 8 deep if you wanted to say Belgium, Eredivisie, and Portugal also can't drop down, and really save it for the Swedens and the some of the lesser, the really truly lesser leagues out there, the Switzerlands and the Austria and some of the leagues that really have don't have the depth and the level. I would be open to debate where you make that cutoff, but at some point you could do it by league coefficient rather than by pot. So if you are Young Boys, for instance, or Club Brugge, or Shakhtar Donetsk, those 2 are pot 2 teams, but if Shakhtar Donetsk gets bounced out of the group stage, the Europa League feels like a reasonable fallback spot for them. It does not for Leverkusen or Juventus, who are also pot 2 teams. So that would be the downside of going by the pot. So lots of different ways you can do this, but I think you're probably following my thinking, which is for the smaller teams, the smaller clubs, or the champions from smaller leagues, from smaller countries, less competitive countries, call it what you will. It would be nice for them to still have the ability to go down to the Europa League once they are out of the Champions League. However, that does not seem fair to allow the biggest clubs to do that. So I am proposing some sort of hybrid system where certain clubs are eligible for that and certain clubs are not. And I think that would alleviate this problem. So yeah, Tottenham, you still have a great chance because Man City's not going to end up in your tournament, and Real Madrid is not going to end up in your tournament, and Bayern Munich's not going to end up in your tournament, but Sturm Graz could, and Shakhtar Donetsk could, and you should still beat them, but it gives those clubs a chance to continue playing in Europe, get more European money, get more home games, draw the crowd, and continue this along. And if you have to have a few fewer teams in the Europa League to pull that off, that's fine. Or if you have to, the tournament expands when that happens, that's fine too. We can work on the mechanics later. But the thinking behind allowing some teams to do it and some not does seem like it would solve both sets of problems without creating anything completely unfair across the board, because one rule for all clubs clearly would not work. I would love to get your comments. Get down in that comment section. Let me know your thoughts on this. I know it's a little convoluted, it's a little out there, but I like a compromise approach, so get down in that comment section. Let me know your thoughts, or if you have any new ideas, let me know. You can also leave some comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub. While you're doing all this, hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. And of course, check out the website, pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.